out and about down under with mind-blowing epiphanic experiences at Uluru, Kata Tjuṭa, and a crystal enigma. Uluru. During the summer of 2023, I spent 3 amazing days in the Uluru and Kata Tjuṭa National Park, the spiritual heart of Australia. Both Uluru and Kata Tjuṭa are deeply spiritual and sacred sites to the local Anangu people who have lived there for more than 30,000 years and who are now the traditional owners of the park. They lease it to the Australian government and work with the park's authority to jointly manage the park using a mix of modern science and traditional knowledge. When Steve announced that he and his crew were going to be working on a project in Cairns in Australia for 5 months, May to September 2023, I was not particularly enthusiastic about joining him. Australia was not exactly at the top of my bucket list. In fact, embarking on a trip down under would completely scupper my long-distance walking plans for the year in the UK, and, if truth be told, I dreaded the prospect of the long-haul flights involved. However, the universe moves in mysterious ways, and it had other plans for me, which were revealed during an epiphanic experience that occurred on the long flight between Singapore and Sydney, and afterwards at Uluru itself. It was night time as the plane was crossing the western coast of Australia. I was sitting in a window seat and was having a quiet moment after previously chatting to the lady sitting next to me, when I felt a gentle hand on my right shoulder, and a voice in my head told me to look out of the window to my right. I looked behind me to see if the person sitting behind was trying to attract my attention, but they were asleep. Why on earth should I look to the right, I thought. It was dark and there was nothing there. However, I turned my head to look out of the window, and my mind was blown away by a view of the most amazing stars and constellations spread across the heavens in the southern sky. The voice told me that one of the constellations was the Southern Cross, and somehow I intuitively knew which stars it was referring to. You should be aware that I previously had no knowledge of the Southern Cross, but later on, when I reached Sydney and looked it up, the configuration of 4 stars which make up the constellation was exactly what I had seen through the plane window. I was amazed by the beauty of that southern sky, which was revealed in its full glory, since there was no light pollution at the altitude we were flying at. The voice then said, "That is what the sky looks like at Uluru. You have to go there." I knew immediately that the voice was right, and that visiting Uluru was the reason why circumstances had conspired to take me to Australia. When I arrived in Sydney, I immediately rang Steve in Cairns and said, "Steve, we have to go to Uluru." There was a long silence, followed by Steve saying, "Why, it's just a big rock in the desert. Why the F do you want to go there?" I told him about my epiphanic experience and said that we could discuss it when I reached Cairns in a couple of days' time. He didn't sound convinced, but I had already made up my mind that I was going and that nothing would stop me. When we were planning our trip to Australia, Steve's project manager, a good friend who was also working on the project in Cairns, had asked me if I would be interested in going to Uluru with her. I fobbed her off and said that I had heard that it was an expensive tourist bandwagon and that it would be sacrilegious to go tramping around a site that is sacred to the Aboriginal people. So, no, I wasn't interested. However, when I told her about my epiphanic experience and complete U-turn, she was really keen to join me, and Steve was mightily relieved because he had been let off the hook and could happily stay in Cairns while my friend and I went off together on a spiritual girly trip. After that, everything fell effortlessly into place. All the potential obstacles to our trip were removed, and we were able to book our hotel in Ayers Rock Resort and our flights from Cairns to Ayers Rock Airport at very short notice. We also booked several tours of the area, not normally possible at such short notice, which included a 7-mile dawn walk around the base of Uluru, a stargazing astronomy tour out into the desert, another 8-mile dawn walk around the lesser-known Kata Tjuṭa rock formations, a bush tucker talk, and a talk on Aboriginal culture. During another quiet moment on the flight from Cairns to Ayers Rock Airport, I was wondering what I was supposed to do when I finally reached Uluru. I immediately entered into an altered state of consciousness, and my guides responded by telling me that Uluru wanted my experiences and my walking grid. It wanted to know about the numerous magical places that I had visited over the years while walking the UK's footpaths and energy network. They explained that Uluru was a sort of knowledge repository, almost like a giant computer on a global and cosmic grid, and that it loved people visiting it because it wanted their experiences too. Throughout the flight, I was tuning in and mentally reviewing all the walks I had completed in the UK and then uploading them to Uluru. I became very aware of all the sacred sites in the UK and their links to other sites around the world, particularly Uluru. This process continued during the weekend of my visit, as I became involved in a two-way process of knowledge and information being exchanged. Because Uluru gives back as much as it receives. After subsequently speaking to many other people who have visited Uluru, I realized that they had all felt its magic and had been profoundly moved by the experience. Uluru exerts a powerful physical and spiritual magnetism. This is not surprising, since the rock that forms Uluru, which is thought to be 500 million years old, has a high iron content, and most of it is actually underground, extending to a depth of 1.5 miles or more. It is the largest sandstone monument in the world. Uluru and Kata Tjuṭa provide physical evidence of the feats performed by ancestral beings during the creation period. Chukapa, or the dreaming, or dream time, which are told in the Chukapa stories. Chukapa is based on the connectedness between all people and all things. Uluru and Kata Tjuṭa are at the centre of a vast energy grid linked by the song lines, which are like our ley lines, which were created by using sound. The energy there was very powerful and loving at the same time. Uluru had a sort of purple and indigo aura, which shifted to a deep turquoise at times. We went on a magical 8-mile walk in a clockwise direction round the base of Uluru, which started at dawn and was led by a brilliant young guide who was passionate and highly knowledgeable about Uluru and the desert plants that grow in the area. I took advantage of the opportunity to badger him incessantly about the medicinal properties of all the plants that we saw growing along the path, and he was very happy to oblige. The two-way exchange of information that I had experienced on the flight to Uluru continued during my base walk as I tuned into the gentle, powerful energy there. I felt very alive and energized, and was almost bouncing along the track as I walked along. Near the start of our base walk at sunrise, the moon was setting as the sun was rising. Cassia, which has antiseptic and antifungal properties and is good for healing wounds and gastrointestinal problems. Bush tomato, in the nightshade family, but edible. Halfway round on the eastern side, I was allowed to touch Uluru here. One of my epiphany moments as I am allowed to get up close and personal and touch Uluru's gorgeous red rock. I hung back from our group to take advantage of the opportunity to physically download more of my information into Uluru. Approach to the Kapi Mutijulu water source. The extremely sacred Kapi Mutijulu water source. The Kapi Mutijulu family cave. Ancient rock paintings in the Kapi Mutijulu family cave. The Kulpi Ninkaku cave, a place for young men to learn hunting skills. The Kulpi Minmaku cave for women and children. Sunrise at Uluru, seen from the west. Kata Tjuṭa. Kata Tjuṭa at sunrise. The following day we went on a 5-mile circular walk along the Valley of the Winds at Kata Tjuṭa, which means many heads and consists of 36 giant domes located 35 kilometers to the west of Uluru. Kata Tjuṭa was awesome, but we did not get the same vibe as we did at Uluru. We learnt why afterwards when our guide explained that it was a men's sacred place, a place of men's business, and that traditionally women were not allowed there. However, tourists are now welcome. This waterhole is about 1 mile along the route, heading into the valley. Pink mulla mulla, used to make a bush essence which is used for healing deep spiritual wounds and to aid recovery from the effects of burns. The walk was quite challenging, very steep and rocky in parts, but no problem for someone like me who has walked thousands of similar miles. Leaving the domes and heading out into the desert. Looking back towards Kata Tjuṭa from the desert. Stargazing. That night we participated in a stargazing tour out in the desert to the west of Uluru. Once again our minds were blown away as we gazed in awe at the full splendour of the Milky Way, a rare sight in our modern world where light pollution prevents such special moments which were commonplace for our ancestors. We stayed and watched the moon rise to the east of Uluru, another magical sight. Our expert guides showed us how to locate the Southern Cross and the celestial emu, whose head nestles just below the Southern Cross and whose body extends almost the entire length of the Milky Way. The Aboriginal people possess a vast amount of traditional knowledge about astronomy and view the constellations in an entirely different way to Western astronomers. Rather than focusing on the actual stars, they focus on the shapes made by the dark space between them, and the celestial emu is a prime example. Through a process of mutual collaboration, Western science is currently learning a great deal from these ancient systems and complex layers of knowledge. Because Aboriginal knowledge and systems of astronomy, food production, and land management are holistic and are based on traditions that have been passed down orally for tens of thousands of years, they were almost wiped out following the arrival of colonists in the 19th century. It has been discovered that some of the more modern discoveries made by Western scientists were actually developed long ago by indigenous peoples, but these were rejected without consideration, overlooked, or even exploited by powerful Western interests. Standing in the desert with the full splendor of the Milky Way behind us. The Milky Way, featuring the celestial emu above Uluru. Crystal enigma. After our trip to Uluru, I spent a long time processing and synthesizing my experiences there, and this is still an ongoing process. Immediately on our return, we embarked enthusiastically on a quest to explore Cairns and its surrounding areas, including the Atherton Tablelands, Port Douglas, the Mossman Gorge, the Daintree Rainforest, Kuranda, the Great Barrier Reef, Paranella Park, and Babinda Gorge. We were determined to learn as much as possible about the Aboriginal and colonial history and culture of the area. The day after my return, I went for a walk around Cairns itself, and, by chance, my footsteps took me to an interesting alternative shop where my eye was caught by a dragon's blood crystal in the window. The lady who was working there said that the shop was the spiritual heart of Cairns. So I had travelled from the spiritual heart of Australia to the spiritual heart of Cairns. The lady told me that this crystal, which is a striking combination of green fuchsite and red jasper, is only found in Western Australia, as opposed to dragonstone, which comes from South Africa. And in folklore, it is believed to be the remains of ancient deceased dragons. It is a grounding stone which combines practicality with courage, enabling us to take responsibility, walk our talk, and solve our problems. Coincidences abounded during my time down under, too many to mention here, but on a trip undertaken during a cyclone to visit some of the waterfalls in the Atherton Tablelands, we discovered the Crystal Caves in Atherton, home to a massive collection of impressive-looking crystals from all over the world. I was very excited by the prospect of visiting these caves, but my excitement quickly turned to confusion. Normally, a place like that would blow my head off, but most of the crystals on display did not seem to be radiating any energy. In fact, they seemed to be dead. I wondered if they had somehow been compromised, or if my own energy had been scrambled by jet lag or something else. When I was voicing my impressions to a young girl who works there, she said that my experience was the total opposite of what most other people had reported. So I got a bit suspicious and thought that maybe they were just pretending they had got vibes off the large crystals simply because they were big and looked impressive. Or maybe I really was scrambled. However, That night on our return to Cairns, I was overwhelmed by a huge feeling of sadness as I lay in bed thinking about those poor crystals. I realized that the people there had no idea what they were talking about, and that the reason why I felt very little energy from most of the crystals was because they were not happy there, for several reasons. A. They had been uprooted and transported from their homelands and had not been properly acclimatized to their new environment. B. They did not like the artificial stuff that they had been embedded in. C. They did not like rubbing shoulders with loads of other poor crystals of all types in the artificial caves with bright artificial lighting, etc. D. They did not like millions of insensitive people brushing past them without showing them due respect. And E. They had probably been treated with something, even though the girl there emphatically denied it. I sent them some Reiki and hoped that it helped. But I felt so sad for them. However, I'm sure they bring a lot of joy to the thousands of visitors, myself included, so maybe they will be okay, especially if some people are giving them Reiki like me. When I told Jilly about my experience with these crystals, she said that there were collections of crystals like that all over the world, where the crystals had been imprisoned and had simply shut down. My experience with the crystals in Atherton made me realize that I need to devote a bit more time and attention to my own crystals at home. So, immediately on my return to the UK, I gathered them all together at the next full moon, and they spent the night outside, basking in the light of the moon. This is something that I usually do on a regular basis anyway, but this time I was even more conscious about the re-energizing process after having been armed with my newly acquired knowledge. Crystals respond very well to love, sunlight, moonlight, and water, especially rain and seawater, and my crystals are always literally buzzing with vitality after a pampering session.